She asks you for 100%, your attention, your availability, your calm, and you give it, almost without noticing. But what you receive in return isn't little, it's zero. Zero messages when you disappear, zero adjustment to your limits, zero curiosity about how you feel. And yet you stay, not because you're stupid, but because something inside this dynamic feels strangely logical. This is not a love story, it's a psychological structure. The core idea is simple and brutal: asymmetry of investment. When one person invests much more than the other, perceived value shifts, not toward the one who gives more, but toward the one who can afford to give less. You are present, always. She is intermittent. And the human brain doesn't evaluate commitment based on effort, but on scarcity. This is where hedonic adaptation comes in. What is constant stops being perceived as valuable, not because it isn't, but because it no longer creates emotional friction. You've become the background. At the beginning, very little was enough. A message, an evening, a look. Now it takes everything, and even that isn't enough. She doesn't ask for 100% because she's cruel. She asks because she can, because your behavior has taught her nervous system that you'll be there regardless. This intertwines with attachment theory. You operate in anxious mode. You increase investment when you feel distance. She operates in avoidant mode. She increases distance when she feels too much presence. The more you move closer, the more powerful she feels. The more she pulls away, the more you try to prove your value. It's a closed loop, self-regulating, perfect in its cruelty. Mini story. You cancel a commitment to see her. She arrives late. She doesn't apologize. She tells you that you're too sensitive. You smile. Inside, something withdraws, but you say nothing. In that moment, the real exchange happens. You give up boundaries. She gains status. And every time you accept emptiness as the price of entry, emptiness becomes the standard. She demands 100% because she isn't seeking an exchange. She's testing a hierarchy. And you, without meaning to, have placed yourself below. Rule card. Whoever receives everything has no reason to offer anything. This is not a moral judgment, it's a law of emotional dynamics. As long as you keep giving out of fear of losing, you keep teaching that losing you costs nothing. And the most unsettling part? She may not even be aware of it. The system runs on its own. The real question isn't why she asks for everything. The real question is, why did you start paying without a contract? In the next chapter, we'll enter the most uncomfortable point: how this dynamic takes root in your identity and why a part of you confuses absence with desire. There is a precise moment when desire stops asking and starts demanding. It makes no noise. It simply changes tone. She no longer says, "I'd like that." She says, "It's normal." Normal that you reply immediately. Normal that you understand. Normal that you stay. This is where emotional entitlement is born, not as arrogance, but as habit. Psychologically, entitlement doesn't come from strength. It comes from the absence of consequences. When someone receives consistently without losing anything, the brain records, "This is mine." Hedonic adaptation enters right here. What once felt special quickly becomes the minimum standard, and the minimum standard over time is despised. You still remember when very little was enough to make her happy: a message, a gesture, a sincere presence. Now it isn't. Now that little is invisible, and you don't understand why. Because the human nervous system isn't built for continuous gratitude. It's built for habituation. The more you give, the less it's felt, not because it doesn't matter, but because it has become air. And no one thinks the air. They only notice it when it's gone. She doesn't wake up one morning thinking, "Today I'll ask for everything while offering nothing." It happens gradually, step by step, silence after silence. You fill every gap. She learns that the gap doesn't exist. And so need turns into expectation, expectation into entitlement, entitlement into demand. From an attachment perspective, this pattern is typical when one side is more invested. The anxious one gives to stabilize. The less involved one receives to regulate. The problem is that regulation turns into one-sided dependence. Mini story. You write to her after a heavy day. She doesn't reply. Hours later, she comes back as if nothing happened. You don't ask for explanations. She doesn't offer any. In that accepted silence, you are signing an invisible contract. A contract that says, "My time is worth less than yours. My needs are secondary. Your absence is justified." She doesn't need to defend this entitlement. You are sustaining it. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Emotional entitlement exists only where someone gives up their own. You stop asking out of fear of seeming demanding. She stops offering because it's no longer required. It's not cruelty, it's emotional economics.
The brain always optimizes. If it can get the same result with less effort, it will, and you are making the minimum extremely profitable. Key idea. When one person feels entitled to everything, it's because someone else has stopped deserving themselves. The critical point comes when you start confusing understanding with self-erasure. Understanding doesn't mean absorbing. Loving doesn't mean disappearing. But you are disappearing slowly and no one notices, not even you. Rule card. What you grant without boundaries will be claimed as a right. The dynamic is now complete. She asks because she can, you give because you're afraid. And as long as this balance remains intact, nothing will change. But every asymmetric system has a breaking point, not external, internal. In the next chapter, we'll enter the deeper mechanism, attachment asymmetry, because not everyone loves the same way, and the one who loves most almost always loses power.
It's not just what you do, it's where you do it from. Two people can say, "I want you," but come from opposite psychological places, and that's where asymmetry is born. Attachment theory isn't about love. It's about regulating safety, about how you move closer when you fear loss, and how you move away when someone comes too close. You move closer, she holds back. Not because she's cold, but because your movement activates her sense of control. If you have an anxious attachment style, you give to stabilize the bond. Presence, explanations, reassurance. Your 100% isn't generosity, it's emotional regulation. If she has an avoidant or disengaged attachment style, she receives to maintain distance. She doesn't disappear completely, she rations, and whoever rations controls the rhythm. This is the point many people don't want to see. Power doesn't belong to the one who loves more, but to the one who can afford to love less. You feel the void when she pulls away. She feels relief when you hold everything together. So you start doing what seems logical. You increase investment to reduce uncertainty. But uncertainty doesn't decrease, it moves. Now it lives inside you. Psychologically, the less involved person becomes the emotional regulator of the relationship. They decide when there's contact, when there's silence, when there's return. And every return, for you, is a reward. For her, it's just continuity. This creates dependence, not chemical, structural. Mini-story. She disappears for 2 days. You search for explanations inside yourself. When she comes back, she doesn't ask how you are. She talks about herself. You're just happy she's back. In that moment, your nervous system learns a dangerous lesson. Presence must be earned. And what must be earned cannot be demanded. Attachment asymmetry does something subtle. It turns the bond into an invisible hierarchy, undeclared but felt. You begin adapting to her level of involvement. She doesn't need to adapt to yours. This isn't destiny, it's dysfunctional compatibility. Two systems that fit together perfectly precisely because one yields and the other withholds. The more you explain, justify, clarify, the more she feels she doesn't need to do anything, because whoever is necessary doesn't have to prove it. Key idea. In relationships, the one who needs security more ends up losing control, and control, even when silent, is always power. You confuse intensity with depth. She confuses distance with balance. Neither of you is lying, but only one of you pays the price. The price is authenticity, because you no longer say what you truly feel. You say what keeps the bond intact. This is the point where you stop being a partner and become a regulator. She doesn't need to give you more. The system already works. Until one day you feel a strange kind of exhaustion, not physical, identitarian. You no longer know whether you're giving out of love or out of fear. Rule card. The one who is more emotionally invested always negotiates from a weaker position. The asymmetry is now complete. She receives stability without exposing herself. You offer presence without receiving certainty. But there's still a deeper level, a level where little isn't accidental but strategically sufficient. In the next chapter, we'll enter the theater of the bare minimum, where giving little isn't absence, but technique. At this point, it's no longer about distance. It's about dosage. She doesn't truly disappear. She appears just enough. She disappears as much as needed. This isn't emotional chaos. It's a rhythm.
and you're dancing to music you don't control. In psychology, it's called intermittent reinforcement, the same dynamic that makes gambling irresistible. The reward isn't constant, it's unpredictable, and unpredictability creates more dependency than presence. You don't know when a message will arrive, if it will arrive, in what form. Every time it does, your brain releases dopamine, not because the gesture is big, but because it's rare. The little becomes intense, the minimum becomes meaningful, not because of real value, but because of contrast with the void. She offers the bare minimum to not lose you, not to get closer, but to maintain access. This is the theater, a performative presence, not a substantial one. Mini story. After days of silence, she sends you a photo. No text, just an image. You interpret it as a sign. She sees it as a light gesture. You construct meaning. She maintains openness. In emotional breadcrumbing, every crumb is calibrated, enough to feed hope, never enough to satisfy. And you stay hungry, but convinced it's your fault. Here, the subtlest deception happens. You think the problem is how much she gives. In reality, it's why she gives. Not for connection, for control of the bond. The human brain is programmed to seek patterns. When the pattern is unstable, attention increases. So she becomes central, not because she's present, but because she's inconsistent. You start living in response to signals, a word, an emoji, a sudden return, and every signal confirms one hope. She hasn't lost me, but it never confirms a choice. The bare minimum has a huge advantage. It creates no obligations. Giving a lot creates responsibility. Giving little creates ambiguity, and ambiguity protects the one who uses it. She can always say, "I never promised you anything," and it's true, but she has always implied just enough. Key idea. The minimum, when distributed intermittently, becomes more powerful than a constant maximum. You're not reacting to the person, you're reacting to the pattern. And the pattern keeps you suspended, never left, never chosen. This is the point where you lose your sense of real value, because you start measuring yourself by her availability. If she replies, you matter. If she disappears, you doubt. Your center shifts. It's no longer internal. It's in her hands. Rule card. Whoever gives the minimum controls the one who hopes for the maximum. And the most dangerous part? You start normalizing all of this. She's just like that. She doesn't like texting. She needs her space. You're rationalizing a strategy that is consuming you. But every strategy has a weak point. The bare minimum works only as long as someone agrees to live in doubt. When doubt is withdrawn, the theater collapses. In the next chapter, we'll see the real cost of this game, not on her, on you. Because giving 100% for too long doesn't make you stronger, it empties you. It doesn't happen suddenly. No one loses themselves in a single day. At the beginning, there's small adjustments, justified delays, unsaid words, postponed needs. You call it compromise, but compromise requires two sides. Here, you're alone. Giving 100% stops being an action. It becomes an identity. You're no longer you who does, you're you who holds everything together. Psychologically, this is gradual self-betrayal. Every time you feel something and choose not to say it, you step one pace away from yourself. The problem isn't what you lose outside, it's what you stop feeling inside. You start filtering emotions, not out of maturity, out of fear. Fear that expressing a need will become a burden. Fear that setting a boundary will become a rupture. So you shrink yourself, not out of humility, out of relational survival. Mini story. You want to see her, she's vague. You say, whenever you want. Inside, you feel a knot. Outside, you smile. That knot stays. It accumulates. Every unresolved knot becomes chronic tension. The body understands before the mind. Fatigue, irritability, a strange apathy. You're not sad, you're emptied. When a relationship requires constant presence without nourishing reciprocity, it consumes identity. You begin to confuse your value with your usefulness. I matter because I stay. I'm worthy because I endure. I deserve love because I don't ask for much. This isn't strength, it's extreme adaptation. And prolonged adaptation becomes invisible even to you. One day you realize you no longer react, not because you've understood, but because you're exhausted. This is the point of no return, when you stop feeling anger but don't feel peace. That's when you understand you're giving everything to someone who isn't meeting you. Key idea. When maintaining a bond requires you to shrink, that bond doesn't hold you, it consumes you. She doesn't explicitly ask you to disappear, but the system demands it, and you comply every day. The psychological cost isn't immediate, it's cumulative. You don't just lose time, you lose orientation. You no longer know what you want without first asking yourself if it's acceptable. The 100% is now a cage because you can't stop giving without feeling guilt. Guilt for having needs, guilt for wanting more, guilt for wanting to exist. Rule card. When love requires self-erasure, it isn't love, it's dependence. And dependence has one defining trait. It convinces you that without the other, you are incomplete. But what you're losing isn't her, it's you. And once you've lost yourself, any attention from the outside feels like salvation. But it isn't. It's only temporary relief. In the next chapter, we'll see the only point where this dynamic can be broken. Not with explanations, not with requests, but with a rule that completely changes the game.
Up to now, you've tried to fix the bond, explain, clarify, prove. But power dynamics aren't resolved with words. They're rewritten through behavior. There is a simple, uncomfortable, unavoidable rule. Who controls the flow controls the relationship. And you, until this moment, have allowed the flow to always pass through you. The temptation is to talk, to say how you feel, to ask for more presence. But in an asymmetric system, asking doesn't rebalance, it exposes. Because someone who receives without investing doesn't interpret a request as a boundary, they interpret it as pressure. And pressure, for someone who rations, is just a signal to manage. The rule that changes the game isn't doing more, it's stopping giving without return. Not as punishment, not as a manipulative strategy, but as internal realignment. Stop filling gaps you didn't create. Stop anticipating unexpressed needs. Stop explaining what wasn't asked. This creates silence, and silence is information. Mini story. For the first time, you don't write. Not out of pride, out of clarity. She notices the absence. Not immediately, but she notices. Because the system was used to your automatic presence. Now something is missing, and what's missing reveals the real value. Psychologically, you're withdrawing reinforcement, and every system based on intermittent reinforcement reacts when the flow is interrupted. You're not disappearing, you're returning to center. This is the hardest point, because silence triggers anxiety in you too. The impulse is to give again, to soothe, to restore. But if you return too soon, you reinforce exactly what brought you here. The rule isn't to be cold, it's to be congruent. Give only where there is meeting. Respond only where there is reciprocity. Stay only where there is real presence. Key idea. When you stop giving without receiving, you reveal the true nature of the bond. She now has 3 options: move closer, renegotiate, or withdraw. Whatever the choice, it isn't a loss, because for the first time, you're not protecting the relationship, you're protecting yourself. This is frightening because you lose the illusion of control, but you recover something more important: emotional dignity. Long explanations aren't needed. Real boundaries aren't explained. They're embodied. Rule card. What you are not willing to lose will control you.
When you are willing to lose the bond in order not to lose yourself, power changes sides. Not because you become dominant, but because you become free. And freedom is incompatible with a 100% for 0% exchange. In the next chapter, we'll see what happens when the flow truly stops, the reactions, the masks that fall. Because every unbalanced dynamic, when deprived of the energy that sustains it, reveals its real face.
When you interrupt the flow, the system reacts. Always. Not because love is missing, but because control is. The silence that was once normal for her now becomes strange, visible, unsettling. This is where the illusion begins to crack. There are 3 possible reactions, nothing else. First reaction, sudden reapproach. Messages, attention, unexpected presence. It's not magic, it's regulation. The system tries to restore the previous balance, the one where you gave and she decided. The difference is that now you see. Second reaction, renegotiation. She asks what's going on, not to understand you, but to understand what has changed in the flow. She wants clarity, only because ambiguity no longer benefits her. Third reaction, withdrawal, coldness, distance, sometimes sudden indifference. Not because you did something wrong, but because without your 100%, 0% no longer holds. Whatever the reaction, there is one constant. You are no longer the one chasing meaning. The system reveals itself. This is the most dangerous moment, because you might confuse renewed attention with real transformation. But attention is not presence, and intensity is not choice. Mini story. She comes back, warmer, more present. You feel relief, but something stays alert. For the first time, you don't get lost in the gesture. You observe continuity, because real change is not a spike, it's a line. This is where you exit the illusion. You realize you weren't fighting for her, you were fighting against the emptiness you had accepted as the price. And now that you no longer fill the void, you clearly see what's on the other side. Maybe there's meaning, maybe not, but it's no longer a tragedy, because you're no longer negotiating your identity. Key idea. When you stop sustaining the illusion, only what is real remains. The real is always simpler, less intense, but stable. And if nothing remains, then you discover an even harder truth. It was only you holding everything up. It's not a defeat, it's a revelation. Because now you know something fundamental. Your value doesn't increase by giving more. It increases when you stop underselling yourself. Rule card. What survives without your sacrifice is the only thing worth keeping. She wasn't the problem. The problem was the invisible pact you had accepted. A pact made of silences, waiting, and unnegotiated hopes. Now the pact is broken, and with it the illusion that loving means disappearing. You remain, whole, not perfect, but present. And this, finally, doesn't require 100% to get 0.